Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rose Llanos. I am the co-chair for Government Relations for SACAC, and I'm excited to be here with you today to discuss our second legislative speaker series, which regards with Title IX. We hit it off yesterday with speaking about AAUW Florida Lobby Days, discussing some important bills, and had great representation from state senators and representatives. Today, we're going to be focusing on the importance of Title IX, and it's going to be the 50th anniversary since Title IX has been in place from 1972. And so we're excited today to bring you a huge array of panelists from different areas in the private sector and public sector, et cetera. So I'm going to go ahead and have my colleague, Ms. Aries Martinez, introduce herself. She's my co-chair, and I'm excited here to be with you today as well.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Aries Martinez, and like my colleague Rose mentioned, I am the co-chair for the Florida Government Relations, for the state of Florida. I am the director of College and Career Services at Christopher Columbus High School, and like my colleague also mentioned, we're very excited to have you all join us today and learn a little bit about what private and public institutions are doing with regards to Title IX. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Iris. As we mentioned, this is a collaboration this week with SACAC, which is the Southern Association of College Admission Counseling, and AAUW, which is American Association of University Women for Florida. And then we are also encouraging and hoping to have you, become a part of both SACAC and AAUW. We do have our Q&A panel open, so please feel free as we move along with the panelists during this time to include any of your questions. So there will be time at the end to ask our panelists any important questions regarding Title IX that we may not cover during the panel. And then we also have a special guest appearance today from State Senator Berman. They are having committee sessions this week, and they have been very busy, but we've been fortunate enough to secure some of our time at the end of this programming. So we'll be able to have her appear and speak to you all. But without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our panelists. Here I have today Ms. Brianna Caterino. She's the former Title IX coordinator for Lynn. Brianna Caterino is currently a consultant at Innovia Solutions in South Florida, where she focuses in the area of Title IX, university compliance, and collegiate athletic compliance. With professional experience stemming from inside both private and public institutions and a master's in higher education administration, she has only recently stepped out of the university to consult alongside institutions in areas such as policy, procedure, automations, best practices, and case management. As a former athletic compliance whistleblower, deputy coordinator, and compliance officer, Brianna understands the urgency and dilemmas that our institutions all face. But in events like this today, together we can learn, connect, and gather the resources we need to take on the next big challenge. So thank you, Brianna. We look forward to having you on the panel. Now I will, of course, and I'm introducing Ms. Maria Sevilla. She is the deputy Title IX coordinator of UM. She's been working with UM for the last 7 years, directly investigating cases. Prior to joining UM, she has worked with domestic violence attorney at the Miami-Dade Legal Aid in that capacity. So congratulations, Maria. Thank you so much for being here with us today. In addition to that, I also have Mr. Bowden Zarsiak, and apologize if I mispronounced that. Mr. Bowden, he is representing us today from Nova Southeastern University. He's the Deputy Title IX Coordinator and Senior Investigator there. He's responsible for a robust prevention education program around Title IX. For the last 15 years, Bo has worked in higher education, experienced different departments such as residential life, student contact, behavioral intervention, and Title IX. He's also previously taught as an adjunct instructor at the University of Massachusetts, Lowell. He's taught higher education, law, and policy, as well as ethics and decision-making. Finally, he holds a doctorate in education from New England College. So thank you, Mr. Zarsiak. We look forward to having you today. And then with our final panelist, we have Ms. Jennifer Boyd-Pugh. Jennifer is our Vice President for University Administration at Barry University. So we're eager to have you here today. She's worked provides leadership to areas responsible for day-to-day administrative operations, including Office of the President, University Communications, and External Affairs. human resources, payroll, public safety, and emergency management. She served the Barry University community for more than 25 years as a university coordinating officer, is responsible for managing all facets of the institution's response to the global pandemic. And she also serves as the University Title IX coordinator. So welcome, Jennifer. We're excited to have you here today. With that, we'll go ahead and get started with questions. So, first question that we're going to ask our panelists, and we'll give an opportunity to everyone to be able to answer, is what have been the major barriers behind Title IX that you've had to advocate for? As we know, it's the 50th anniversary this year, taking place on June 23rd. Title IX has included everything basically to prevent discriminations on the basis of sex and holds protections for everyone. But what have been specific barriers that you have encountered in your areas, especially coming from such a diverse and wide range of industries?
Well, I know my experience in the collegiate realm. I mean, definitely being on campus, the biggest barriers that we have on campus, right, are our fight for resources. Keeping up with the new regs in the midst of the pandemic. That was incredibly hard when we had to revamp our entire policy. We had to work on programming in a different manner. We had to rely on outside counseling, most of us, for areas such as just like, case review with outside lawyers, consultants, or even outsourcing for different roles, because these new regs were just so profound and really we needed so much more. I think that we all fight too for staffing. Internal staffing is really difficult. Our cases increase as the years have gone on, and we've statistically seen that, how they've increased, which is something that's scary, but at the same time, I think that it's good because it means that we're having more conversations about these things. Our students are better educated and more aware of when they need to report something. They support each other better in reporting, but also they feel more comfortable coming forward and reporting. So with cases increasing, we need more staff than ever. And that is a very limited thing. And it's very hard because most offices for Title IX are staffed with 1 or 2 full-time employees. So then we're really also trying to get, volunteers or stipend other people across campus to kind of help us with various roles, such as, advisors or maybe part of coordination and intake, that kind of thing. Also creative programming as well. But I think what ties in with all of those, even though we need the resources, right? What we need to also get is our staff and our administration above us to also have a better understanding of why we need these resources and what's going on, and get them on the same page as us as to like why we need this extra support for our students.
Thank you, Brianna.
I think to just piggyback on some of the stuff that Brianna was saying, I think another challenge that has been well documented at this point is the burnout of staff that work in Title IX, right? In some cases, because of the lack of staff and changing regulations and giving schools 3 months to review their whole policies, as the Department of Education did, in the midst of a pandemic. So I think that's a challenge. And I think one of the ways that we have tried to engage at UM is to work with our professional development staff and the office to kind of provide programming for for the people who are doing the work, because that can be tough. And another thing that we have noticed as a challenge is that we are very fortunate that we do have a lot of resources, and we did have a lot of the infrastructure, and we actually are very lucky even in our staffing numbers, just because of the way our university is organized, that we work. We have a central Title IX office, which is very small, but we work very, very closely with our Dean of Students office, with our Faculty Affairs office, and with our HR department, so that the load is spread. Even though the office is small, we do have a lot of people on the team. And so we are lucky to have a lot of options and resources and things that we offer, but a challenge is always to communicate those to our community, right? Because students have orientation, right? And they go through a week of orientation where they hear about everything and anything. And obviously, particularly, we've seen students coming with more and more interest on Title IX issues, but it's still a challenge to make sure that they can access the information and that they know where to get the help when they need it. Even if the help exists, but nobody knows how to get it in a moment of crisis, that can be a real big challenge. So some of the things that we have done in the last couple of years to try to overcome that has been, we did launch a couple of years ago a peer ambassador program. So it's a peer educator program. So the students actually come up with the programming to get the resources to the students and get the information to the students. So they've done all sorts of creative things like making stickers with, the peach emoji. So things that will be appealing to the students, right? And kind of bridge that gap between the administration and the student experience through the use of ambassadors, and also having information more readily available as we have reviewed our website, making sure that students can find everything within 2 clicks, that they can file reports online. They can always come in person, but if they want to, that they can file reports online. We've done bathroom stall signage so that they can access the information again when they need it. It's something that we actually haven't gotten to, but we have talked about also bridging this gap, is whether we should have, and this ties back to the staffing issue, but we should have some sort of text message sort of system where they can get support. We do have a 24-hour hotline that they can call, but it doesn't include a text message feature, which we have been hearing from students, right? So I think there's twofold. One challenge is, how do we provide and have the services and the staff to do everything we need to do? But once we are doing it, right, also how do we make sure that it is accessible to our students, and not only to our students, but also to our staff and faculty, which are often left out of the Title IX conversation, but I think, are becoming more and more a part of it as well.
Thank you, Maria. And if any of you have mentioned, the new regulations, if you could expand upon that, and then we can, thank you, Jennifer.
So I'll chime in a little bit because the new regs that came out are particularly onerous. That's the word I would sum up where Title IX is today. The new regulations that came out in the midst of a pandemic were quite onerous, from the investigation, kind of segregating who can do what as part of the investigative process, the cross-examination piece of the process, which wasn't technically particularly well received for victims. And so with all that said, I will say that is particularly challenging. And I'm going to piggyback on both what Brianna and Maria alluded to, is when you put all of the onerous regulations together, such as cross-examination, your Title IX coordinator can't participate in the investigative process. When you're already resource strapped and you don't have staffing, and many of us, I would call it at small to medium-sized institutions, and I hear this amongst my peers across the board in the small to medium-sized institutions across the state of Florida, you don't have the resources you need to do all those pieces. So some of us have had to take the approach to outsource investigative procedures, including panels, to get the needs met in the event that we actually have a Title IX case. And so again, staffing, resources, communication, and the onerous component of the regs have been particularly challenging for us.
I would just like to follow up kind of on what the point Jennifer was making, because this was how I was going to answer the first question anyways, is that the most challenging piece over the last year for me, or the last 9 months or so, is just explaining to a student how the process is going to work. Because if the incident or the behavior that impacted them didn't take place in a certain location, or didn't involve certain behaviors that fit these 3 categories that we can do a standard analysis for, it's not Title IX. And so then we kick it to another office, which is very hands-off. It's not trauma-informed at all. And trauma-informed people now run away from that word because they feel like it swings towards a victim response, but it's not. You could be trauma informed that's very equitable. And so for me, Jennifer, and first of all, the other challenge that Brianna and Maria brought up, I think hit the nail on the head. But to Jennifer's point about the regs that came out of last August of 2021, sorry, it really hit the nail on the head that it's not only made our jobs more challenging, but for the students, it's become extremely confusing. And I think it leaves a lot of colleges to not deal with issues that normally we would. And there was recently a court case out of the Third Circuit that just got this posted yesterday that basically schools aren't dealing with things that happen from non-students because it's not under the Title IX regulations. Well, the reality is yeah, you don't have to deal with that, but there's other things we could be doing like prevention and kicking it to another office and those kind of things. And so the reality is the regulations which are meant, I don't think anyone's trying to be harmful with them, but I think they're meant to help, that actually hindered. And then I would say in the next year and a half, we're going to get updated regulations, because in April, they're going to post a new comment period with the new regulations under Biden's administration. And so in a year after that or so, or a year and a half after that, we're going to see new regulations that we'll be adjusting to as well.
Right. So then we're going to have to pivot again and work on our resources to make sure that we have everything that we need to meet the regulations and to meet the needs of the students. So yeah, it's an endless cycle. And just like Maria said too, burnout is so seriously real. A Title IX coordinator on average only stays in the role for about 5 years before moving on. And that turnover is really tough. Then you got to retrain, get someone else into that position. It's a lot of work.
And going back to the medium to smaller size institutions, many of us take on these roles in addition to what I would constitute our day jobs. We don't have full-time staff dedicated to Title IX. And again, I hear that from across the board colleagues that fall in that lane. A lot of times we don't have dedicated staff just working on Title IX training, communication, policies, procedures. We do this in addition to our other roles.
Well, just to add to that, I think that's not just a small to medium school problem, right? I'm at Nova now, but my previous institutions had been large institutions as well, and we didn't have one full-time Title IX person, and that's for 20,000 plus students, right? And so, but I actually think resources are going to get more scarce because we know enrollment is going down in higher education, right? Most places are now fighting enrollment crunches based on lots of different factors, and so I actually think maybe some gains that some places have gotten are going to be rolled back, or they're not going to gain anymore, which is scary in my opinion. It worries me.
Yeah, very much so. But then it ties back to the point of understanding and support from the people above you, right? Because again, even if the numbers are going down, if you don't have someone in that role who's effectively taking care of these cases, training, educating students, then when something bad is going to happen, and then you can get sued for hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars, and that's going to in turn go ahead and affect the kids who want to come into your school again. So it's this endless cycle where we really need to stand up and see the importance of something like this and give resources where it's needed, for preventative measures.
Thank you, Brianna. I know with AAUW Florida, we are promoting passing the Gender Equity in Education Act, which was provided by Pansy Mink and Lise Slaughter. This year, we're looking for more additional resources to provide educational entities with more resources and establish an Office of Gender Equity. So there is, movement on legislative level to be able to adequately prepare for these adjustments that you are advocating for. So that's great to hear. And I'm going to also include that link for any of our AAUW members who are meeting with their state representatives and senators and want to advocate. There is a way for you to sign up as an activist, a 2-minute activist, so that you can promote passing gender equity GEA. So thank you for that. So you've already alluded to just the lack of resources there are. What other effects have your students have experienced with the onset of the pandemic and changes in administrations that you can expand upon or would like to highlight?
I can jump in. I think one of the things that I've noticed is that there's students staying longer in unhealthy or toxic, abusive relations, whatever term you want to use, and not just with in a romantic relationship, right? I think we've seen students who have been victims of abuse or violence from parental units or whatever guardianship that they're in. And now because of pandemic that they've been back there in those situations. And so I think schools also need to kind of look at what flexibility they have when a student is in those situations to provide some assistance for that. I think that's a big concern. I know at the K through 12 level, I have young children in public schools, and I know that that's been a topic that the teachers have talked about as well, as kind of kids having to be at home more because of the pandemic. And so that's kind of one of the things, just one thing, I don't want to take up all the time, but just one of the things that's been on my radar is the kind of the influx that we've seen around that, particularly when it's a guardian or a parent situation, not just a romantic relationship.
I would say in terms of services in the pandemic, the biggest thing for us is technically services were not impacted per se, right? It was just how we delivered those services. So when we had to pivot during the pandemic, obviously, face-to-face went away and we pivoted to all remote services. So the challenge was making sure that students understood that those resources were still available. They were just available in a different mode, and accessing and how to access them was a little bit different. But I would not say it impacted our ability to provide those services.
Yeah, as a follow-up to that, I would say when we were coming back to reality a couple months ago, which now we are back to a more COVID restricted life again. But I do think one good takeaway, which we've all seen in different aspects of our lives, but particularly with Title IX, is that it did give us more flexibility to reach some students and reach some folks who otherwise maybe wouldn't have the time or the weren't in the mental place to come to an office to get help, or and that we were able to connect with folks in more ways, which that is helpful. So I think moving forward, that will be a good takeaway, is that we will be able to continue to offer more options, that are going to be a little bit more personable than just a phone call, if we can connect with a student via Zoom because they can't come, or they are on study abroad, or they are home for a break, but they still need those services. So I think now that the students know these services are available in this way, we have at least seen, I do have some student request and prefer. It's not for everyone. And I mean, I'm more of an in-person person, maybe that's just age. But we have seen some folks who have a preference, and certainly in terms of scheduling, it can be helpful. One of the things that we have noticed as a little bit of a trend in our community is that there's been a lot of folks who have been reporting incidents that happened a longer time ago. And, they have been able to sort of in the everyday life, been able to push some experiences, some negative experiences that they had sort of to the back of their mind. But with COVID, being in isolation or being back home and seeing folks and whatnot, it triggered individuals, as we know, mental health issues have skyrocketed, unfortunately, during the pandemic. And we have seen that reflected in a lot of folks who have made sort of delayed disclosures to us, as in like, this happened 2 years ago, but now that I'm really thinking about it, this has really taken a toll on me. And we also saw a little bit of a rise with the return to campus, folks that had experienced an incident and never reported it, but now that they are back in the environment, again, they're having some triggers, and this is affecting their well-being. So I think that impact has been seen as well, and hopefully we'll be able to provide services and satisfy everyone's needs. But it's a difficult, when you add the mental health impacts of this, it becomes especially difficult.
Thank you, Brianna. Did you want to?
Yeah, if I could, because also too, part of your question was what about like the part of the administration that impacted the provision. So also too, during this time, during the pandemic, right? Again, it's Title IX final rule came through, that changed a lot for us. And that had some real serious impacts that we also saw on campus this year as well. Just the changing time requirements. And so here's an example, like the way that we were able to respond to emergencies, emergency response and removal, the bar raised dramatically, right? We were not able to respond in the same manner as we were before in the previous administration set of rules. And this really limited and scared the school's ability to respond with an emergency action plan. And for me, this was concerning because, on campus, we saw an allegation of sexual assault, 2 in one night. And unfortunately, the school reviewed and thought that it was not the time to take emergency action. It did not meet the threshold and the student remained on campus. The issue that it really caused is other students. It caused a lot of other students anger and disbelief because they don't understand the new regulations that came into effect and why are things different now than they were before. So them not being able to see, hey, the school didn't take immediate action. I actually had to have a lot more meetings with other students outside of the initial parties of that case just to talk and say, hey, all right, let's sit down and let's explain, what the school really did to respond, what rules that we are confined by that we have to work with, and why. So yeah, in the middle of the pandemic is still trying to deal with teaching everybody, about the new regs and what the school is doing to work with them and respond appropriately.
So I think maybe seeing the chat here a little bit, it might be helpful to maybe provide a little bit of background on the Title IX rules. So I'll give my little sort of spiel and I'll let others chime in. But basically, Title IX was adopted in 1972, a long, long time ago. So when you think of how our understanding of what sexual misconduct is, what actually being welcome in an environment means, our understanding of gender identities has changed, and grown in that time. There's been a lot has changed since 1972. And with that, I think we will all agree. Now, guidance had really been very, very little up until the Obama administration. So really, Title IX says that a university cannot discriminate based on sex, right? And so they're having very little guidance on what that actually means. During the Obama administration and now President Biden, during that time, Vice President took an interest in this. And there was sort of renewed efforts to say, okay, it looks like schools have been brushing things under the rug. They haven't been giving students and the attention that they need when they have claims of sexual misconduct. And they've sort of been interpreting in many ways Title IX very narrowly to just mean, what is the university doing? Is the university discriminating? Is the university doing something bad, but not paying as much attention to student on student complaints? And the Department of Education at that time opened over 200 investigations into universities and issued some rules, some guidelines really, as to how they think universities should respond to allegations of sexual misconduct involving students, whether they happen on campus or off campus, sort of general guiding principles to provide a baseline of what the university's obligations are in providing a safe space to students where they can actually thrive and fully access their education, right? Because if you're going to class with someone who sexually assaulted you, you are not going to be, or you might not be able, most likely, to fully access your education. So this was kind of the idea during that administration. When the new administration came in, like the Trump administration, there was a sense, and I'm not trying to be political here, I'm just using the political references as points of time, but there was a sense that there had been a little bit of an overcorrection, right? With the Me Too movement and with these new guidelines where basically the moment somebody said you sexually assaulted them, you were considered guilty, right? And so we've seen this also in the mainstream media. It's sort of the same wave that carried on. And so the Department of Education took an approach that they said, we are going to review the processes that schools are using and provide new guidance to make sure that concerns are being addressed, but also that they're being addressed in a manner that is fair to both the complainant, the person who's reporting an incident, and also the accused student. So they took what they call more of a due process sort of approach to how cases are reviewed. And that was expected. What was not expected was then that they did a number of other things, like providing very prescribed steps that a school has to take, saying things that go way out of what you normally expect in higher education, like saying, for example, that if a student doesn't have someone to advise them during a hearing, during a process, the university has to find that advisor for a student, that there needs to be a hearing in a case and there needs to be cross-examination, something that is not typically a part of any student conduct behavior. So there were many things like that that were sort of revolutionary. Also, they restricted in some ways the obligations of universities. And so if an incident happened off campus under Title IX, specifically, the university no longer has an obligation to treat that case as Title IX. And while Title IX had been treated for many years, I think, as a general umbrella term for any concerns of sexual misconduct or gender discrimination, now it became a very specific niche thing that involves certain specific definitions of sexual misconduct, and that can vary if the behavior, if you have the same sexual assault happen on campus, that's Title IX. If you have it happen off campus, that's not Title IX. That's very difficult to explain to a student, right? And so, but the new Title IX requirements are so strenuous, like I said, in terms of having a hearing, having cross-examination, providing advisors, different timelines, that you don't know what's best. Do we use the same process for everyone? Do we try to use a more friendly process for the cases that do not fall under Title IX? So it did cause a lot of upheaval in the higher ed space. And in addition, all of that, as we've kind of been making reference to, was made worse. Like they put out proposed regulations and gave people an opportunity to comment. And then 2 years went by while they took all the time they needed to review the comments. And then they came back and said, I think it was in March or May, basically, these regulations go into effect August 14th, 2020. So you have 3 months in the middle of COVID to review all of your policies and bring them up to speed. And that's why the new rule, a lot of folks thought that when the new Biden administration came in, they would just kind of get rid of the Trump rule. But because of the way that it was legislatively done, it is a lot harder to get rid of that than it was for the Trump administration to get rid of guidance. Because any department can put out guidance and withdraw it at any point, but the question and comment process actually creates law, and it's a little bit more difficult to undo. And that's kind of what someone else was mentioning is we're sort of in this, for years we've been waiting, like, what is actually going to happen? When is something going to stick? Because now the new expectation is that again in April, there is going to be new guidance from the Biden administration that potentially takes back the new rule, and we might have to review everything again, hopefully with more than 3 months to do it, but we don't really know. So I think that's at least a little bit of a summary. I hope it wasn't too far, but I'll let everyone chime in to add anything.
I can just add that I think the point, as someone that was a chief conduct officer for a long time, I think the one thing that the regulations from the Trump DeVos Department of Education really changed is that for a very long time, public institutions had 2 requirements: to provide notice and to provide some sort of way to be heard. And so these regulations put that on its head. Now, over the last 50 or so years, court cases in different circuits have added other regulations. So the Sixth Circuit does require cross-examinations for some conduct cases if there's a chance of a credibility issue, if you're examining credibility. But the reality is these regulations made this not just they made these regulations basically change the whole due process issue for colleges and universities, not just public, but private, because a public institution has different ways to do things than private, because private is about contract law, about what you provide already. And so public is a little different. And so it just really kind of upended everything. What I'll say is, I think I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I do think cross-examination is probably here to stay, especially because several circuits have now litigated it. Particularly the Sixth Circuit. And I don't agree with it. I'm not saying it's right, or I don't think that's a good way to do things. But I do think I don't anticipate that going anywhere. And the last point I'll make is I think people had an anticipation that we were in the Obama administration overcorrected for victims or complainants. This administration, I think the feeling a year in or more is that we've way overcorrected for the rights of the accused. It's not an equitable process any longer for either party. That's just my 2 cents. Thank you.
And I'm sorry, I want to give other people a chance to talk, but I just want to say something really quick about what you said about cross-examination. Part of what makes the cross-examination aspect here so, I'm not called crazy, but like so unusual for a regular student process is that it's not just that you can have cross-examination, but it's that an attorney, a trained attorney can conduct cross-examination. I'm an attorney. I got out of practice because cross-examination is very tough to conduct. And if you do it well, you are going to put the person you are cross-examining in a very uncomfortable situation. So when respondents can have an attorney who has been professionally trained to sort of put their emotions aside and question a victim, and some are going to be more trauma informed than others, but really to do their job right is to make that person uncomfortable. And so it's not just the cross-examination. We always allowed cross-questioning, for example, in our process, but it was done directly by the students through a panel. But when you bring an attorney into that mix, it really changes things up. And it's very different from anything that we see in almost any student conduct process where really attorneys are not a part of it.
And I can't agree more. They've basically turned our student conduct process into a court of law, and we are not a court of law. And so there needs to be a little bit of a correction. I get the cross-examination, but maybe it needs to be called something else and facilitated in another way without precluding the victim's rights and role, especially in cases of sexual assault. The one comment that I will make is that I do want the participants to understand that Title IX is much greater than sexual assault. It includes things like pregnant and parenting students and breastfeeding and stalking, and it's a much broader regulation than just cases of sexual misconduct. It's all sex-based discrimination. And so I just wanted to mention that so people are aware.
I think Jennifer points 100% well taken. I do this image when I do presentations. So a lot of my work is prevention work, and it's an iceberg, right? So the iceberg 70 or 80% is underwater. But the things that we talk about the most are the high profile things. So that's the sexual assault and the high level stalking cases, just like in the news, Bill Cosby, and we hear about Harvey Weinstein. But the reality is, the more effective we are of stopping of the gender discrimination, the homophobic slurs, all these other little things, the less likely the bigger things above the surface can face. So I agree 100% with Jennifer's comment.
Thank you both.
Yeah, someone also asking the questions like, what are common complaints under Title IX? So common complaints are, our categories under Title IX are dating violence, domestic violence, forcible fondling, quid pro quo, sexual assault, harassment, and stalking. And what we've been talking about too, how some of us, we have difficulty, with cases coming in, and if they don't fit the defined categories that have been placed under Title IX, then they have to fall somewhere else. So a lot of schools have taken those other things like gender discrimination, it doesn't fall under this with the originally prescribed final rule. So we had to put it somewhere else, and then where's the equity in that of, okay, so now it's under the, student code of conduct policy, how are our procedures going to reflect the same as they are here in Title IX? And what kind of resources do we have that we can effectively, give the same respect, courtesy to this case as this case? Because, this sexual assault happened off campus in a non-university setting. So it doesn't fall under Title IX, yet this sexual assault occurred on campus. So it goes through the full Title IX process. That's where it's extremely difficult for schools, and it's extremely difficult for students to understand these great differences.
Thank you, Brianna. And along the lines of confidentiality, of course, and cross-examination, those are important things. We do have a student from Lynn University. She's actually at the campus as a specialist for Lynn University and aspiring to go into the Title IX field. And so she just wanted to ask to see what you all are doing. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to her to ask her question regarding strategies.
Hi, my name is Samantha, and as Rose had said, I was a student here, but I'm also going into my master's here as well, and I'm looking to go into Title IX, into that field. And I have always been wondering with the new administration and how what strategies have been best to help victims when it comes to cross-examination, because obviously we know that cross-examination has been hard for victims. So what are the strategies or the best strategies that have come about that to help victims participate in those types of things?
I think the best strategy so far, because yes, for complainants and respondents as well, but for complainants, it's extremely daunting, right? To come in and say that hey, I need help with this. And then we're saying, okay, now this goes through formal investigation if you want some sort of outcome from it. And you have to submit to cross-examination. That can be so extraordinarily scary, right? Because it really reflects what's happening off campus with those adjudication processes. So I've found that the best thing to do so far is to calmly explain the process, calmly explain the why and the how, what their rights and resources are. But also too, giving the complainant, I think, a good understanding as well as to who else is participating, also helps them understand and get the courage to go ahead and to move forward and to take part in the cross-examination, but just clear understanding and explanation is best.
I would say I would agree with what you're saying, is I think being upfront and honest and transparent, regardless of what your process looks like, is the most important thing with students. I would also say that if your institution hasn't looked at updating your policy since the Cardona decision this summer, where cross-examination, everyone doesn't have to answer every single question and it won't be eliminated from the record, that's something you should do. There's some institutions that, as I think either Brianna or Maria talked about earlier, about the way you can update your policies, a life cycle might have to go to certain people, right? But that's a really good way to show advocacy or to show support, that not just for the victim. Sometimes there's questions that the respondent doesn't want to answer because maybe there's a criminal charge pending or something else. And so I think if you're looking for ways to make the process more inclusive, if your institution hasn't updated their policies regarding cross-examination based on the Cardona decision this summer, it's something you should look at and consider. I'm not here to give advice or to talk about what I can tell you, that our policy just was updated to state that we will consider all information that was provided in the investigation and at the live proceedings, whatever that's not the exact terminology, but that's the baseline. So, we give some students, you don't have to even submit to it. We understand that you're not going to have to answer those questions, but things have been updated since the regulations based on that court decision. And then the Department of Ed saying they're not going to be enforcing that part of the regulation.
And I will say, for, again, the participants, the best part of working, I would say, in higher ed is certain things we kind of just freely share with one another. It's not like in a highly competitive business market. So we do a lot of benchmarking amongst, I can tell you, I've worked with Brianna before when she was at Lynn, and we have our own little Title IX group. We share policies, we share procedures, we share kind of best practices amongst the group. So even in the K through 12 or the higher ed space, that is one thing that I think that we've gotten very good at, so that we can all, you know, kind of do the right thing by our students.
I think to sort of add, I think one thing to remind people just along the iceberg is that very few of our cases actually do move forward through a full investigative process. And a lot of the work is really kind of providing support and resources to folks before we get to even a hearing, and really being open-minded and understanding of students who are not in a mental space or for whatever reason not ready to go through a hearing, and respecting their decision in terms of that. So being as supportive if they do want to move to a hearing as if they don't, you know, just really that's being very trauma informed, like allowing people, empowering people to make their own decisions, right? And not just kind of saying, well, it's either this process or nothing, because there is a lot that we can do for folks without going through the process. Now, you asked specifically about the cross-examination. I think like Brianna was saying and others were saying, procedural justice is obviously a huge
Start my
part.
video because the host has it disabled. Hi.
Experience. And I'll close up really fast, but I think another thing that can't be understated is the importance of providing an appropriate advisor for the complainant, because many times respondents will go out there and hire an attorney, you know, because they feel, okay, either I hire an attorney or I'm going to get expelled. And complainants might not have the same means or ability, you know. So I think now that universities have an obligation, I mean, we have a legal obligation to provide an advisor, but also a moral obligation, I think, in some ways, to provide an advisor. And that is hard, and kind of maybe brings us full circle to the issue of funding and staffing, because to provide an advisor that can effectively conduct a cross-examination is not an easy thing to do.
Thank you so much,
Or
Maria.
a cheap thing to do. So yeah.
Thank you. So I do see that thank you so much, Samantha, for your question. I do see that we have State Senator Lori Berman joining us as of now, and she's the District State Senator for District number 31, Palm Beach County. Thank you so much for joining us today, Senator Berman. We were having a wonderful panel discussion today about Title IX, the 50th anniversary, and discussing some really important actions that are taking place by our different institutions in the state of Florida. We also know that you are supporting other bills that are very important to all of SACAC and AAUW Florida, which includes the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, as well as human trafficking. So we just wanted to say thank you for this time that you have with us to really discuss any of the above.
Sure. No, I'm happy to be with you guys today. I love AAUW, all your issues. I think we're pretty much in alignment 100% of the time. And I'm always happy to work with you because I know that you guys are out there and advocating really strongly for women. And, you know, we need more champions on that area. So thank you for everything you do.
Thank you so much, Senator Berman. Does anyone have questions for Senator Berman? Dr. Kay Lee, I believe she's our public policy director, and so she will be, I know she had a question specifically with regard to.
Thank you, Rose. Thank you. I wasn't quite prepared for this, but Senator Berman, thank you so much for being here. We had our virtual lobby day yesterday, and we covered a great deal of bills. And one of the bills that we had that I think you are sponsoring with Representative Skidmore on the abortion human trafficking. Can you tell us a little about that and where you stand and how it is that we can assist you at the AAUW level as we go forth doing this session to help it get enacted? Thank you.
Sure. So the bill was actually put forth by my state attorney, Dave Ehrenberg. He's tried to be really as proactive as possible. It's really hard in this state. There's a lot of human trafficking in this state, unfortunately. So, you know, he's been prosecuting people and he sees where the holes were. So one of the things that the bill does, when a lot of times these human traffickers coerce people using drugs, and that's part of the bill. It was included that if you use the drugs to coerce the individuals to be part of your human trafficking ring, that's a factor that the court will look at in determining that trafficking did take place. And another factor that Dave said we needed to add was alcohol, because that's also being used a lot. And so that's what the bill does. It adds alcohol. That's one of the things the bill does. The other thing the bill does, and obviously everybody gets nervous when I start talking about this bill, and they're like, you're not doing anything to the victims, and we are not. I will tell you, the people who are the victims, we understand that, and we don't want them to be put in a bad position, but we are trying to make it harder for the pimps. And so one of the things we're doing is we increase the penalties if you are actually transporting someone. I think right now it's a misdemeanor, and we make it a felony. And we increase the penalties if you run what is considered a house of prostitution. So if you have, women there, right now it's also a misdemeanor. So we are increasing the penalties and making that also a felony. So the bill got heard in its first committee in the Senate. I got to look up and see where we are for the second committee. Next week would be hopefully we could get it heard in its next committee. So it's looking good. I'm hoping it'll move also in the House. There are some other human trafficking bills that are there, and the Attorney General has some human trafficking initiatives that she's doing. I think more have to do with awareness, making people aware, especially, we truckers and people who are in the situations where they can see what's going on. So there is a real positive movement toward, it's a real bipartisan issue, and it should be, obviously. So it's an issue where we're always looking for ways to continue to stop the scourge, because it's huge. It goes on. It's much bigger than we realize in the state of Florida. And it's even like the girl next door could be being groomed by somebody. And that's what they do. They groom these people to get them involved in the process, and they befriend them, and they give them money, and they give them drugs, and they give them alcohol, and they set them up in this process. So we're continuing to work on it and to try and figure out ways that we can stop it and penalize the people who are part of it.
Thank you so much, and my apologies for not being on camera. I'm having some technical issues today, so please, my sincere apologies for that as well. But Senator Berman, if I could just, there's a Representative Toledo. She has, I have not had an opportunity to speak at her office, but she does have a really good human trafficking bill. Are you
Correct.
in support of that bill as well? I was fortunate enough to hear her at a press conference, and I understand that she does sit now on the state attorney's human trafficking commission. Can you tell us a little about that bill? Are you familiar with it, or if not, I don't want to put you on
I'm not
the spot.
familiar with it. Somebody said to me that she has a human trafficking bill. I heard she has one. I'll be supporting it. I heard it's a great bill. I heard it's good. I just haven't looked into the details of it, and I'm sure it'll be, she's done great work on human trafficking, and I'm sure she will continue to do so. She's probably not going to be here after this year, is my understanding. Maybe, she hasn't announced anything official yet, so I probably shouldn't say anything, but we're hearing rumors to that effect.
Right, understood.
Thank you so much. We do have another question from the panelists from President Pat DeWitt from AAUW Florida. Please explain what the proposed Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion would do. If you could speak a little bit more on that, Bill.
Sure. So this is probably one of my #1 bills this year, and it's probably not going to get one hearing, unfortunately. I brought this bill last year also, but with the middle of COVID and everything going on, it kind of didn't get much attention. We've put more focus on it this year. We had a press conference about it in November. Tracy Davis is my House sponsor, and she's also trying to get more attention on it. So what we wanted to do was, just like every business in the state of Florida has a diversity officer, and many agencies in the state of Florida have a diversity officer, but we wanted to have somebody who was on a statewide basis, who basically reported directly to the governor and would talk to the governor about issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. That position, it would be a new position. It's there's a lot. We're not going to require, the bill is pretty broad because we let them figure out what they need and what they feel like is important for the state. I mean, some diversity officers are looking at every single contract that the state does and analyzing it in terms of, was it bid out appropriately so that minority communities have access. We're not going to specify, but we wanted to have that office and let them take the lead and figure out where the diversity should be. We did specify in the bill that there should be implicit bias training in the state. And as many of you know, we're going in the opposite direction, unfortunately, here in the state of Florida. And so that's the reason why that bill will not be heard. And it's very disheartening because the state of Florida, yesterday we heard a bill in the Education Committee meeting, which would basically chill discussion of the history of racism and sexism in the United States. It's a K through 12 bill, and it's disconcerting that that seems to be the direction that we're heading in. So I'm very sad that the bill hasn't gotten any traction. I will tell you, we drafted the bill in consultation with a woman in Virginia who is the was the diversity, equity, and inclusion person there. They did it in Virginia. They put somebody in that position. And she was kind of working through what it means to be one of the first statewide cabinet, kind of level people doing that. And I just read that Glenn Youngkin is one of his first executive orders is he took out every reference to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I would imagine that position is gone. So like I said, unfortunately, we're moving in the opposite direction right now in the United States, but the pendulum does swing and we will see what happens. And I can't imagine, to me, it just makes such sense even from a political point of view that you want to show that. And even if that person did nothing but was a figurehead, at least you have somebody you can say, look, we're trying. We have a diversity officer in the governor who talks to the governor. I mean, I think it would be tremendously politically, a benefit for him, but right now it doesn't seem to be a priority for anyone.
Thank you, Senator Berman. On behalf of SACAC and AAUW, we know the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and especially within our respective departments, we'll be upholding a lot of those values, whether it's through Title IX, as our panelists discussed today, or through supporting their bills. So I do have one more question from Susan Groden. I'm going to allow her to talk so you can ask your question out loud. Susan, are you there? Oh, she might have trouble.
You're on mute.
Yeah, you're on mute. That's okay. Well, we'll definitely follow up and send any questions to
Rose, I have a question, if I may.
Sure.
Raise my hand. Thank
Absolutely.
you.
We have about just
Senator Berman, I know you sit on the education committee, and I just heard you bring up about we're going in the opposite direction. And I see that, there's a bill that we are in opposition of that will remove the critical race theory from public institutions and teaching. Has that come forth to education as of yet?
So that's what I was speaking about.
Right,
they did half of it yesterday.
Okay.
And they didn't call it critical race theory because they're playing games a little bit on this. So they did half of it. The analysis talked about the anti-woke bill and the critical race theory, but the language of the bill itself doesn't actually talk about that. But what the language of the bill says is you cannot teach anything that will say one group is better than another, and you can't teach anything that will cause the children to have guilt. Anyway, that was fascinating because we had a pastor get up there and say religion is all about guilt, and it's important to teach guilt so that people can change their behaviors. So we heard the half of it, and unfortunately it did pass. Myself, Tina Polsky, and Chevron Jones are the three Democrats on the committee, and we really went after it. There's even an employment provision in there about any training that's done on employment levels can't make anybody feel guilty and can't teach anything about one race being different from any other race. So it was ugly. And it's the half. And there's another bill by Senator Gruters, I believe, that's the other half. Because this bill does not, the bill we heard yesterday does not, in the form it was yesterday, could morph, does not allow parents or anyone to bring a private cause of action, which is good. We don't want that. But I think the next bill allows parents to bring a cause of action if they don't like something in that they hear that their children is being taught.
Now, the Gruters bill you just mentioned, is that the one that wants partisan elections of school board members? Or is that a
No,
different?
it's the anti-woke bill still. It's an anti-woke bill saying like parents can bring actions against the
Okay.
if they have it. But Gruters has that bill too.
Okay.
He also has that other one about partisan elections of school boards. And
Boards,
also,
right. We are opposing that one as well. We're in
Yes.
opposition of it.
and
Yes.
term limits of school boards too.
The bill that you said passed yesterday, what bill was that specifically? Do you have the number?
I believe
do.
148. I believe it was 148. It's by Manny Diaz.
Thank you.
Sure. It only passed its first committee. But, and so it probably morph into, but it could morph worse than better, would be my prediction.
And would that include private employers or only public?
So the employer part is both, which is amazing. So Polsky, who's an employment lawyer, did an amazing job, like picking apart what they're doing. And they're claiming that the employment only applies to training, but it's not real clear in that bill. So they might clarify that it only applies to training in the employment context. Because Tina was saying this could, I get fired and I'm going to say I was fired because, they put me in a position where it had to do with this bill. Like they said, I said something that I shouldn't have said according to this bill. And, that's why I was fired. So it's going to lead to a lot more litigation, this bill.
Thank you so much, Senator Berman. We appreciate your time today. Thank you all for participating in Title IX, whether important bills in the state of Florida that we're trying to support. Both AAUW and SACAC are really grateful for your time and your participation.
Happy to be with you guys. Thank you for all you do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. To have a good day, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Right, so that concludes the end of our session. Thank you again to our panelists. Thank you all for attending. I know we are well over the time and we want to be respectful of that. But please, if you can take a moment to fill out the feedback survey, we appreciate it so you can improve the experience for next time. And I look forward to seeing you tomorrow for another great session. We have a panel, a presentation on financial aid. So we're excited to be able to continue this week's legislative speaker series. And hopefully we'll see you then. Thank you again. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rose. Great session.
Thank you.